This morning, I awoke to the clock radio, and they were talking about no more king's marches. And today, we have the story of a king marching, but a very different king, not a tyrant the way that we have experienced in our world. But this morning, we want to focus not so much on the type of king, but on the response of people to this king who comes in very differently than the power brokers that we experience in our world. 2 weeks ago, I took Gemma and Joel with me to the island where I was speaking at Black Creek United Mennonite Church. On the way back, Gemma chose a seat on the ferry that had a big screen TV a few rows ahead of us, and this is what we saw on March the 17th. And I remember Gemma being kind of concerned about the bombing in Iran and was asking questions. Why? And I couldn't really give a very good answer. It's complicated. But, of course, there is no rationale because the world leaders are stuck in a rut. We've always done it this way. You have problems, you drop bombs, instead of looking for more creative and compassionate solutions. The Palm Sunday story also has some complicated layers. A drama begins to unfold on this day, climaxing in the execution of Jesus on Friday and his resurrection on Sunday. Today, we are also concluding our thematic series, Encounters with Jesus. And we have met 11 different people who encountered Jesus. First of all, Levi, also called Matthew, the tax collector. It's tax season. Who loves tax collectors? Nobody. The woman at the well. She was a Samaritan, a despised mixed-race person who had had 5 husbands. The man born blind. Somebody must have sinned for him to be born blind. Was it his parents? Maybe he was born in sin. The bleeding woman. Women were considered unclean every month during their period. This woman had been bleeding for 12 years. Very unclean. The woman caught in adultery was going to be stoned for her crime. The Gerasene demoniac was a crazy man who lived in a graveyard. The Syrophoenician woman was a foreigner who dared to confront Jesus. The paralytic by the pool was a hopeless case lying there waiting for some kind of magic water to move. Mary, who anointed Jesus' feet, was considered provocative and extravagant, overly extravagant. Mary Magdalene had 7 demons cast out of her and waited for Jesus in the dark. The Roman army. What do all these people have in common? They were outsiders. None of them belonged. They were sick. They were sinners. They were outsiders. And yet, They all encountered Jesus in profound ways. But we have left out a group of people who encounter repeatedly. They appear prominently in 6 of the 11 stories we have looked at over the past few months, and on many more occasions in the Gospels. Surely they should get some press. Well, we're going to correct that today. In the story of Levi Matthew, they questioned why Jesus would be eating with tax collectors and sinners. In 3 stories, they accused and harassed Jesus for healing somebody on the Sabbath. They questioned Jesus' commitment to the Bible when Jesus refused to condemn the woman caught in adultery. And as the evidence mounts and they repeatedly encounter Jesus, they begin to plot a plot to kill him. Who are they? Which group of people am I talking about? I am talking about that group of people we all love to hate. The Pharisees. But let's give the Pharisees a fair shake. They were good people. Of the 4 religious groups at the time of Jesus, they were by far the most endearing. Here's the other groups. Which one would you like to be part of? First of all, we have the Essenes. They were like a monastic group who lived quietly in the desert in separated communities so that they would not be defiled by the world. Come out from among them and be ye separate was their motto. And they're not even mentioned in the Gospels, and they would have been okay with that. The Zealots were the opposite. They were zealous, violent freedom fighters who took up weapons against the occupying Greek and Roman empires. Blow up the entire system was their motto, their battle cry. Then you have the Sadducees, who were the wealthy and urban elite who lived in Jerusalem. And of course, being who they were, they wanted to keep things the way they are. They were the economic, political, and religious conservatives who did not believe in weird things like the resurrection from the dead. That's why the Sadducees were so sad, you see. The Pharisees were much more progressive and much more spiritual, and they did believe in the hope of the resurrection. They mostly lived in rural areas, which is why they encountered Jesus more personally than any of the other groups. The Pharisees studied the Scriptures carefully and followed them obediently. They were always looking for new ways to apply the teaching of the Bible to everyday occasions. They attended worship services more regularly than anyone. They were always very careful to do all the right things. And even more importantly, they were very careful not to do any of the wrong things. Just as a bit of an aside, if you read your Bibles, you'll notice many different terms, such as high priest, chief priests, Levites, scribes, elders, leaders, legal experts, teachers of the law, and so on. These are just different jobs that Pharisees and Sadducees had, so it's referring to the same group of people. They're just different jobs of the Pharisees. Which group are you most like? All 4 of these groups were looking for a coming Messiah, an anointed king who would save them from their oppressors. which was presently the Roman Empire. Thus, their encounter with Jesus, whom we know as King of Kings and Messiah, but their encounter with Jesus becomes very dramatic because of this hope for this rescuer. The first time the Pharisees encountered Jesus is when the crowd is paving the way with jackets and branches and shouting and singing loudly. Blessing on the new king who comes in the name of Yahweh. Peace on earth and glory in the highest heaven. The Pharisees, who were part of the crowd, object to this irreverent ruckus. Teacher, scold them for being so noisy and out of control. Tell them to stop. In Matthew's account of Palm Sunday, the children are shouting in the temple, and the Pharisees tell them to stop for the same reason. The temple is a holy place. Worship should be subdued and respectful. In John's gospel, this is interpreted as the Pharisees being jealous of Jesus' popularity with the crowds. The Pharisees would say, faith is not about jumping on the latest popular fad. The Pharisees were defending a faith that was lived out in daily obedience to the law, rather than following some sort of upstart Messiah who was just becoming overly popular. Be careful. The second time the Pharisees encountered Jesus is after he cleared the temple. Oh, that's not the one I wanted. But I did find it online when I was looking for a cartoon on it, and I couldn't resist. The second time the Pharisees encountered Jesus is when he cleared the temple of merchants who were selling things and helping people to get ready to worship. The temple was the symbol of God's presence with the people. This is where all people would come on a pilgrimage a few times a year to make sacrifices and to worship their God. And people would come from long distances away and from different cultures and different countries. What the buyers and the sellers were doing is performing a legitimate function by exchanging money into the proper currency and having goods so that people could make the proper sacrifices. Why is Jesus having this temper tantrum and kicking them out? The Pharisees are wondering. And then he calls it my house. Like, who does he think he is? And so the Pharisees accuse Jesus of desecrating the temple and interrupting and disrupting the proper routines of worship. The Pharisees knew the proper routines of worship and the acceptable ways, and Jesus was threatening everything. Now, I know that most people want to love Jesus and hate the Pharisees. But I hope I have been successful in convincing you that we are a lot like the Pharisees. The Pharisees are us. The Pharisees are good people. We are good people. Solid, obedient, faithful, respectful, reverent, clean, orderly. We should not hate ourselves. So what's the problem with the Pharisees? What's the problem with us? I remember reading a book some years ago by John Fisher. He was a singer back in the day as well. The book was called 12 Steps for the Recovering Pharisee, and then in brackets, like me. I'm not sure why I don't have the book anymore. Maybe the like me was hitting a little too close to home. The same author also wrote, Real Christians Don't Ask Questions, with don't stroked out. And also, Real Christians Don't Dance, with don't stroked out. After many decades of following Jesus, it's easy for us to get stuck in a rut. This is something to recover from. Last Sunday, Ed challenged us with the stages of faith. I think the Pharisees were stuck in the simplicity stage, and at best, perhaps the complexity stage. They were infamous for creating a complicated constitution of rules. They knew exactly what was right and wrong. It was all clear. They had a list of do's and a list of don'ts about how to live a godly life. It was simple. If you grew up in a conservative Christian environment like I did, the Christian life was mostly about what we did not do. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't dance, don't play cards, don't have sex before marriage, don't play sports on Sunday, all the things that I thought were exciting as a teenager. But the Christian life is more than a list of do's and don'ts. What I hope that this series of encounters with Jesus has done for us is open us up to encounter Jesus. And also open us up to people who encounter Jesus perhaps differently than we do. And open us up to encounter Jesus in new ways that might be unfamiliar to us or threatening to us, and yet have the possibility of transforming us. Transforming our perspectives and transforming our lives. The Pharisees had good intentions. They wanted to guard the temple. They wanted to protect proper worship and orthodox, correct doctrine. They wanted to live in God's ways. But their caution kept them from seeing the new things that Jesus was bringing. From recognizing the reign of God that was breaking into the world. A reign of love and justice. What about us? How will we encounter Jesus? Our world is aching for hope. Our world is hurting for healing. Our world is longing for peace and justice. This is a time to give up our Pharisaical ways. It's time for the reign of God. It's time to open our hearts to the risky new life that Jesus is bringing. It's time for transformation. It's time for perplexity at the mysteries of God. It's time to experience and spread God's love. It's time for some harmony. It's time.